Namaste viewers and welcome to another episode of Amazing Vedas with Dr. Parikshit Singh. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for joining us today. As you know, we have entered the month of August and it's a special month for a variety of reasons. But on the 15th of August, we celebrate not only the independence of India. We earlier had a program on the US centenary, in fact, 250 years of America's independence, but now we are heading to India's independence. But it's also a very special day for all of us because it is the birthday of Sri Aurobindo. And viewers, I'm not going to talk about Sri Aurobindo's 5 dreams. Everyone talks about that on his birthday. But I want to talk about something really, really important to, the Amazing Vedas series, which is as follows. We got into our study of the Vedas, our understanding of the Vedas, because of Sri Aurobindo. Am I right? Because we both read this book, The Secret of the Veda. What an incredible book. And Dr. Singh, what I'm finding now is that, it's a gift that keeps giving. I mean, not only the book, which is the key to the Veda, but the Vedas themselves. So, my question to you, my opening question is that, do you think, for example, that going back to the Vedas, not necessarily in the way of Swami Dayananda Saraswati, though we respect him tremendously, but using Sri Aurobindo as a ladder or as a key, and then we return to Sri Aurobindo as we want to, again on his birthday, we find that we understand Sri Aurobindo better because we have read the Veda. So my question now today pertains to the future poetry because, all of us love poetry here on this channel. So how does the Veda, our sort of reading of the Vedas via Sri Aurobindo help us understand the future poetry? And maybe we can just start by, reading a poem. I've also chosen a poem. Maybe you can also read us a poem, Dr. Singh. What do you think? Whatever you like.
Absolutely. So, Sri Aurobindo has really brought, as you know, the Veda back into light, and I would say a modern light, because, of course, Swami Dayananda is great, and he brought some very important aspects of the Veda before us, and we always are grateful to him for his amazing contribution. The concept of the Shlesha, he brought that out. The concept of the unity in the Veda, though he called it monotheism, but with a little respect, we will expand that monotheistic concept into the concept of many in one and one as many, or a dynamic unity, perhaps, which, again, remember, he was a scholar of Sanskrit, and he was not aware of the mental undercurrents and all the psychological lingo that monotheism, the pressure that monotheism puts on us. But he had, an amazing insight into the Veda. But Sri Aurobindo brought it to the light in a modern way, which today we can critique it, we can analyze it, we can use etymology. You can use, of course, Nirukta, the Vedangas, which we love. So Nirukta, Vyakarana, Chanda, you can bring that. And so coming to Chanda, you can appreciate Veda as poetry itself, just as poetry. And that is just fabulous, because, of course, chanting of poetry is a very important Vedanga. But Chanda are the feet of the Veda, right? So that sense of beauty, now I'm appreciating the Veda just as poetry. The sounds, the how it changes. Agni is so concentrated. Vayu, the second suktam, is expansive. And then when Saraswati comes, she brings that whole force of that ocean. Maho Arna Saraswati. And then I'm really enjoying the Indra suktam, the one that is 1.4, in the first mandala. And that is, again, another beautiful work of poetry. I'm not even talking about the spirituality or the Adiv Daivik understanding of it. So let me take that beautiful realization of poetic possibility that is hinted at in the Veda and then bring it to Sri Aurobindo's own appreciation of poetry and his own writing. And if I may say, in some ways, I believe it influenced his own writing, in his own poetry. And he said that. His Savitri is a work there where he tries to bring the Upanishadic and the Vedic sound into English as far as possible. So I'm going to read 4 lines that I just love. I think they are among the best in English poetry, of course. And I also believe they are among his best. Of course, Savitri is there, which is another great work which tries to capture the sounds of the Veda. But here, let me read this in just these 4 lines and see if you like it. And then there's a mantric way of studying it too, so that we will talk about it. That is nothing, it's not my original contribution, but that's an Indic way of looking at it. It's from the Life Heavens, a poem written by Sri Aurobindo. Arms taking to a voiceless supreme delight, life that meets the eternal with closed breast, an unwalled mind dissolved in the infinite, force one with unimaginable rest. So these are the 4 lines that I absolutely love. And if you listen to them, you can hear almost an expansive experience. You can almost feel it in your own marrow, what he's feeling. And so that is why I absolutely adore. I think it's a very powerful mantric line.
Exactly. You mentioned Chanda. In the future poetry, Sri Aurobindo talks about, in some ways, mantric poetry as the inevitable future of poetry, because we have to return to that rhythmic mantric utterance, and you mentioned chandas. In other words, he goes through modern poetry, free verse, and so forth, but he comes back to the idea that eventually poetry will again come back to some pure rhythms and vibrations, and it'll be the spoken word. It won't be textualized so much. I mean, we love T.S. Eliot, and in many ways he's mantric, but you can't just listen to Eliot. In a sense, you have to study him, and it becomes highly, should I say, sophisticated, partly artificial form of written verse, you see, because of the way in which, frankly, the way in which the language was evolving and, after the invention of the printing press, and that affected the Veda as well. The Vedas were never meant to be written down, let alone printed, because that's what Shruti meant. Shruti meant that each utterance would be something entirely new. Anyhow, so the textualization actually of poetry, as we talked earlier in one of our episodes, means, in fact, that, AI and, all these other tools are going to churn out words by just trawling through all of human poetry which is available. So only that which is fresh, like fresh utterance, in some ways escapes the AI, because AI is entirely relying on the past. It's entirely, LLMs can only trawl through whatever is printed. It can't as yet pick up what we are now speaking. So in some ways, we are back to the spontaneity of the spoken word, and where, in a way, the mantra, if we can spontaneously compose in chandas, would be amazing. So, but I want to come back to this question of the future poetry, because it's only after reading the Veda again and our program. In fact, this Amazing Vedas has been amazing for me as well, because almost every day, I am confronted or I receive some new insights into questions that puzzled me for a very long time. So, when I read the future poetry, Dr. Singh, many years ago, many years ago, I should say, more than 40 years ago. I don't want to reveal my age, but a very long time ago, I did a PhD on mysticism in Indian English poetry, and I had 2 chapters on Sri Aurobindo, and I read the future poetry, and I couldn't understand what is this overhead aesthetics, what is overmind, what are these 3 levels, overmind, illumined mind, intuitive mind. I mean, what is all this? It was kind of beyond me what Sri Aurobindo was saying. But now, going back to the Veda, we see that Vedic poetry is not Vaikhari. It doesn't come from the spoken word as we know it. It's mantric. So even if it is spoken, it is not just everyday speech. Let me put it like that. Nor is it madhyama, and nor is it, it is pashyanti and higher vak, to use the Bhartrihari classification in Vakyapadya. But the root of it, of course, is in the Veda, because the Veda tells you only 1/4 of vak is visible and 3/4 is invisible. And vak, is like this Devi. She's a very jealous goddess, and she does not reveal herself except to the one she's intimate with, her husband. This is all in the Veda. We are not making it up. So what I'm trying to say is that it is only after going back to the Veda that I began to understand that the future poetry is Sri Aurobindo's revitalization of that idea that Vak itself is at varying levels, it's at different levels. And in a way, to understand Shruti, we have to be in touch with the, Paravak, or the supreme power, of that goddess, which we already talked about. And the missing link, once again, I find very interestingly, from the Vedic to the Upanishadic, and then there's a leap. The missing link is Kashmir Shaivism, or the Shaiva Tantras of Kashmir, where Paravak is once again worshipped and enshrined, because Para we don't find in, as you know, in Vakyapadya. In Bhartrihari, there is no Para, there's only Pashyanti, Madhyama, and Vaikhari. So I wanted to ask you, we ourselves have talked about the future poetry, and again, we are going to talk about the future poetry in the next episode today. But what is your view of the future poetry from this Vedic perspective?
I think what Sri Aurobindo saw was humanity evolving into a newer awareness, and that newer awareness finding new modes of expression. And in fact, he opens up the field radically. He takes the past, and this is a very unique kind of bhashya he wrote on what poetry is and what it should be. I've not seen any poet or any critic or analyst talk about the poetry of the future and give a kind of sense of what it will be. I haven't read it. Of course, there have been great critics like Harold Blumen and Eliot himself, and then Coleridge and all, and they may hint it, but no one has given such a clear direction to it. I think a couple of things I can tell you from a very simple understanding. I think we do not express the fullest value of sound. That is one thing I think we can all learn from, especially, poets, aspiring poets like me, we can learn, and pun intended, aspiring poets. We can try to see how language itself creates a psychology, how it affects us, using all the Indic models, but then going beyond. So not just the value of each atomic sound or the varna, the smallest sound, but also the togetherness, the sound value of the whole, which Sri Aurobindo tried to explain. And it's tough to explain, but it's when you almost maybe like a spota. When the whole line is together, the whole line comes as one to you. It is, you cannot take even an iota out of it. Because if you do, the whole meaning changes, not because the word is changed, but the sound has changed. And then we also learn how to hear behind the sound, if I may explain it. It's almost when you're listening to a great, say, Indian musician, and behind there's a veena going on. If you can imagine this with me, there's a background resonance going on. So in the poetry that Sri Aurobindo talks about has a background resonance, something that carries in the togetherness of the words creates a background resonance. So all these possibilities are there, which he called the mantra, something eternally ringing behind that you catch, that transforms your consciousness. And he did capture it in Savitri. If you read, when I read it, there's a new meter he found, and he created that meter, and he expansively, of course, wrote a long epic. So I think we will, at least a few things I can say from my perspective, obviously learning from Sri Aurobindo, but also from Matrika, since you brought in Kashmir Shaivism. Matrika Vidya, every sound to bring its highest possibility in the whole, and then the whole bringing to a higher possibility, because we have explored the fullest value of the smallest sound. I don't know if that makes sense, but at least that's how I take it.
Yes, in fact, you've brought in another point here, which is, in my view, very important, which is that, when we think about mantric poetry, it is both sequential as well as total. In other words, it's like sequentially, because see how sentences evolve until
Yes.
you hear the end of a sentence, or until you hear the verb, or until the object is revealed, the full sentence doesn't make sense. So meaning is, in a sense, revealed in time, and sentences, in a way, progress in time grammatically. But the idea of the sphota is that the sentence or the sound or the vibration makes sense as a unit, as a whole. So
Yes.
it is an explosion of meaning all at once, and it is also sequential, revealed almost like a time release capsule. So, in fact, it makes us wonder at the different dimensions of meaning, of sound, their interrelationship, and also of time. Because, if you jump centuries and bring in somebody like Derrida, then what he's trying to say is that things make sense only when you know what they are not. So, no word or no sentence in a language is intelligible unless you know everything that it is not. So,
Yes.
entire human language is actually one unit in a very interesting way.
Yes.
So that one sound opens up the entire dimension of sound and sense, which is what, in a way, Matrika, that goddess is, who becomes Paravak, that the mantra, the vibration takes you there. So I think that the future poetry is a really important text, and we'll talk a little more about it. But it also gives us the template, of what we want to do maybe next in our poetry lab. And
Yes.
let's talk about that in our next episode. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for joining us. Namaste, and see you soon.
Namaste.